My name is BJ Engelhart. I'm the Director of Operations for Career Services. Welcome to our Management Consulting Alumni Panel. I'm very excited to be here today to be able to do this event. The primary reason we chose this topic for this event, kind of one of our pre-career fair events in terms of kind of the consulting industry, is really twofold. Number one, we've seen an incredible increase in interest both from our students and from the many consulting professional services firms in Chicago for the talent that our students bring to industry. Two of the firms here today are over the past 3 years, are among the top 10 employers in terms of numbers of hires of our new grads. And we have several other ones in our top 20 firms that are companies that are hiring our recent graduates. So lots and lots of interest from Chicago consulting industry. The other reason is from a career services perspective. You know, we've realized through conversations with students and conversations with alums that are working in the professional services industry, we're realizing that this is a really great alternative option for our students. Now, I don't want to say alternative in any sort of a bad way by any means, but thinking about studying engineering, architecture, science, the sciences, you wouldn't necessarily think of consulting as kind of your direct path post-graduation. But I think what we're realizing in conversations is a lot of students feel that the skill sets that they have through their degree programs here really help them to find a lot of, really find that consulting and professional services is really the best fit for them. Find a lot of career satisfaction from careers in this industry. So we're really excited to have a panel that represents a wide variety of experience levels, consulting types, as well as consulting firms. And so I'm going to start by just doing a quick introduction of the panel today. Our facilitator today is Andy Billhorn, who is a practice area lead at Slalom Consulting. Our panelist, Bogdan Bistrianu, digital marketing manager at Accenture. Leo Sakar, business technology analyst at Deloitte. Oscar Guzman, senior consultant for data architecture and integration at EY. And Sarah Kirby, consultant at Slalom. I want to also note that this panel is a collaboration between Career Services and the IIT Alumni Association as a part of our Hawk Talk Career Management Seminar Series. This seminar series was started in 2015 to provide a library of professional development resources by Illinois Tech alumni for Illinois Tech alumni and students. We have a whole library of Hawk Talk seminars that you can find on the IIT Alumni channel on YouTube, going all the way back to 2015. We've got a wide variety of seminars that have happened as a part of the Hawk Talk. We've had panels like you'll see today, but we also have webinars, individual and group webinars, podcasts, etc. So we're really trying to make this a kind of a multi-channel series that our students and alumni can use these resources as they are kind of learning to discover their career path. So please take advantage of those resources when you get a chance. And with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to our facilitator, Andy Billhorn.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, panelists. I'm excited for coming back. Always great to come back to IIT, or Illinois, as I called it when I was an undergrad. I graduated in 2000. That's with 3 zeros. And I'm going to let the rest of the panelists talk a little bit about introduce yourselves a little bit. What was your major, and then what were the things you were involved in on campus when you were at Illinois Tech? So go down the line.
All right, hey everyone. My name is Leo. I graduated May 2018, so not too long ago. A lot of things are still relevant to me if you want to speak about that. I studied computer engineering and engineering management, so it's a dual degree as a bachelor for both. And I was involved in student government. I was a resident advisor, and I'm blanking out on the others, but those were the two main ones. Oh, and I was part of the Leadership Academy as well. But yeah.
Oscar here. I studied chemical engineering and graduated May of 2017. While I was here, I was involved in Engineers Without Borders, the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, Delta Tau Delta Fraternity, a couple other things, but held leadership positions in those, and I think really kind of defined my experience here.
Bogdan here. I studied business administration with a concentration in marketing. I didn't have a lot of on-campus kind of activities, but I was involved within the business school. We had a group called the Undergraduate Business Council. It was mostly, at the time, just a place for folks to just go and ask for advice or help with homework or test prep and stuff like that. So that was kind of like my primary extracurricular involvement. And mostly because while I was studying here, I also worked part-time, so I didn't have a ton of time to dedicate to kind of extracurricular activities outside of that. So.
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah. When I was here, I studied chemical engineering and biological engineering. I graduated recently in 2018. Oscar and I were buds. When I was on campus, I was involved as a resident advisor with Leo. So we're all friends here. And one of the big experiences that I was involved in was with the Office of Admission. I was a tour guide.
Thank you, everyone. We'll start with our questions. First of all, this is 101, so we're going to define our terms. What is consulting, and why do companies hire consulting firms?
Okay, well, I can speak to that, which is funny because I just started this about a year ago, but I'll try to give you my rendition of what consulting is. So consulting is professional services helping other companies solve their biggest problems that they need to bring in assistance for. So that could be anything from a new technology solution, design, marketing, product management, organization structure, strategy for the company. So they bring consulting companies such as the ones that you see here in to help them solve large problems like that when perhaps they don't have the resources to solve them themselves.
Yeah, and I can definitely add to that. I was recently working on a project where the client was basically trying to do some personalization. It was digital marketing and digital kind of ecosystem stuff. So on the client's website, they were looking to do personalization for their traffic, right, like their customers. And their team at the time didn't really have a lot of experience in the field. They very smart, very smart folks. They just didn't have a ton of background in the personalization space. So Accenture came in, my team came in, and we basically showed them how to do the work, right? Like we put a project plan in place. We showed them this is like how we've approached this in the past. We have a wealth of expertise, right, in all the different kind of fields or not fields, but all the different kind of areas that kind of funnel into consulting or into personalization. And over the course of 8 to 10 weeks, we basically train their team to this is how you should think about personalization. This is the process. This is the type of data that you need in order to enable some of these things. So to your point, it's helping them kind of go from point A to point B where they don't already know. They don't have a good plan to go from point A to B. They hire consulting to help them along that way, right? To guide them, to hold their hand almost during that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the examples really kind of give light to what it is. So kind of building off of what he was saying, for example, I had a recent project where a client, they knew that their technology architecture, the way their business was operating, was really inefficient. They had trouble really analyzing their information, deriving anything really positive from it, but they didn't know where to start. So we came in as a small team to really do an assessment of their current state data architecture. And what we brought with that was really our experience working with a lot of companies like them, being able to bring that perspective, and then also to a certain extent expertise. You need to, be reliant, on the type of knowledge that you say that you're good at. So yeah, really understood what the issues were, wanted to understand where they wanted to go, and really built them a roadmap and, help them along the process of getting to a new, future state data architecture.
One more thing that you guys might appreciate to know is the kinds of roles. I don't know if we're going to get into that, but I just want to let you all know that you can be 100% technical in that, like, you're hands-on coding or designing, architecting, anything, really, in this world. You can also be on the other end of the spectrum where you're just project managing and you're working strategy, completely distant from the technology, but you're supporting in it. So there's a huge spectrum in there, and there's something for everyone in this room, guaranteed. That's the beauty of consulting.
Yeah, I was going to kind of summarize kind of what I heard everyone say here. Essentially, consultants get hired when expertise is needed or expertise is rather lacking, and expertise is held by your firm. So supply and demand function. Not if anyone took economics in undergrad, but my question then is, for that, how did you get into consulting? Let's go back this direction. So how did you find yourself into consulting? Rewind back to Illinois Tech years, and then how did you find yourself there?
Okay, so for me, it was I was my last year running around into conferences and just meeting as many companies as I can. I remember going to this one conference, and as you usually do, you would prepare ahead of time, read about the company, and I came across Deloitte, and I had learned a little bit about consulting beforehand, but I'll be honest, consulting was not a track that I was seeking. It was just, I started reading about Deloitte. I loved what they're doing. They had a very clear structure and a clear future. I was like, this sounds like something I really want. And then I started the conversation with the recruiter, and then things moved forward. Before I knew it, I was in there. One caveat that I would like to point out, though, is, and we can get into this more later, or you can ask me on the side, but with Deloitte, for example, they have traditional schools that they employ from. Illinois Tech is not currently one of them. We're hoping to make that happen soon. But there are methods for you to apply through their online system and seek out people like me who already work there and are IIT affiliates and might help you get through a referral. We can talk more about that later.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome point. Building off of that, how I fell into consulting. So it was my senior year, chemical engineering student. I was working as a quality engineer, manufacturing alcohol, and that was looking like what my opportunity was going to be after school. But truthfully, it wasn't something I was passionate about. It wasn't something I was excited to do after school. So I was feeling a bit frantic about what it is that I wanted to do and what my next steps were. Kind of luckily, I found myself doing some MATLAB homework at a Starbucks on Michigan Avenue. And I ended up running into who was a director at Slalom Consulting. And then I dug into that a little bit more and found out that I actually had a good amount of connections there, one being Andy. And started my career at Slalom Consulting for 2 years, and then recently made the switch to Ernst & Young. So happy to kind of talk about both of those experiences, and to his point, how to be more intentional about being in consulting as opposed to falling into it like I did.
Yeah, so my experience is a little bit different. I graduated in 2011, so I'm a little bit further ahead in my career than these folks. But I went to a career fair at IIT in my senior year. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was hired by a small kind of family-run company out in Northbrook, northern suburbs of Chicago. just as inventory. I thought I wanted to do logistics and kind of that whole space, right? Like inventory management, logistics, like shipping and all that stuff. Turns out that's not what I like to do. I worked there for a year and a few months, didn't work out. And then I pivoted to the startup kind of scene. So I found a company in Chicago called Signal. At the time when I started, it was maybe 30 people. Actually, I worked there for about a year and a half to almost 2 years as office manager. So really taking several steps back from, an actual career, right? And working as office manager. But before that, so the reason why I picked that company is because they were doing tech, right? So they were doing software that allowed marketers and advertisers to do their job more efficiently. I'll just say that. So that was kind of what I went to school for, and I was like, this is great, this is marketing. But I wasn't happy being an office manager, so I kind of worked my way into a technical kind of account management role within that company after about 2 years. Worked in that role for a while, learned the ins and outs of like the digital advertising industry, which is it's so complicated and it's a bowl of spaghetti. So I learned that, and then I transferred from there to more of an analytics kind of company, just because that was like the natural kind of progression. Like, how to do digital advertising, but then everything comes back to measurement, like return on investment, et cetera, et cetera. So like, how do you actually measure what you're doing? So I worked in analytics at this new company for a period of time, and then one of my coworkers from that company basically transferred to Accenture, and she hounded me for 6 months. Like, she's one of my best friends, and she's kept saying like, come work with me at Accenture, come work with me at Accenture. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but for me, going from like a startup, like very small, like 50, 60 max person company to something like Accenture or Deloitte or Ernst & Young, right, where you have tens of thousands or whatever, right, number of employees, I was like kind of a little apprehensive. But once I met everybody that was going to be on the team where I worked in, I met them, I talked to them, I asked them good questions, and they really sold me on the company. And one thing that I wanted to say about Accenture, and I don't know how true this is for Deloitte or other ones, but Accenture is a company that's made up, this is my definition, so it's not official, but it's a company that's many different companies within one, right? So like each kind of team or like each group has their own kind of like leadership, and they have their own kind of objectives and their specializations and stuff like that. And where I landed within Accenture, which is interactive and personalization specifically, it was just a perfect fit for me, right? It checked all the boxes. I've always wanted to be in marketing. I knew that. I've always wanted to work in the digital space. I knew that. And I always wanted to work with smart people that are caring and friendly and all this stuff. So, once I got to see all that, and I was sold, and I'm happy at Accenture. So that's how I ended up in consulting. Beforehand, I was just doing account management, stuff like that. But now, for about 2 years or so, I've been a consultant. So that's me.
And what I think is important to call out from your story is like the power of the network.
Yeah.
So you found your perfect fit because your former colleague was able to tell you, she was
Absolutely.
enjoying Accenture, right? Which is kind of similar what happened for me. So I guess it's important to call out the fact that I studied chemical engineering, but I'm not spending my days designing reactors. So, it can be considered a bit of a directional change for my career. So why did I do that? I think it was my extracurricular experience at Illinois Tech that really showed me that I was passionate about a different area that I really didn't know about myself when I chose chemical engineering as a major. So, and that was my experience working at admission as a tour guide. I loved the interaction with people. I loved the experience of coaching people and making big decisions for their lives, but I still enjoyed the technical aspects of my job, or as chemical engineering would lend itself, the math, the problem solving, the engineering thinking. I wanted to couple both of those things. So that's how I found consulting as an option of a blend of technical work and business people-oriented thinking. So then to find myself in consulting, I actually leveraged my network. Knew Oscar, he was at Slalom at the time. He introduced me to Andy, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and I'll be real brief in I have a very nonlinear career path. I started after graduating from Illinois Tech, I went and designed and built laboratories for pharmaceutical companies for 3 years, found myself in project management fairly quickly there, and then did something completely different. And I was actually doing some volunteer work designing a vocational technical school in Uganda. And I decided at that point in time, like, I loved this, but I wanted to go back actually and spend time in higher ed. So I spent 8 years as a campus pastor at Northwestern University. So I worked for a group called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and for 8 years helped students decide this. When I was taking a sabbatical year while I was focusing on my MBA at Northwestern, one of my former students called me when I was at a networking event. He said, "Hey, are you on the market?" And I literally said, "Sean, what have you been smoking since you graduated?" He said, "Ha ha ha." I'm like, "No, seriously, what would cause you to think that?" He said, "I think you'd be a really great consultant." And I couldn't get the bug out of my head. He said, "I want you to interview." So I interviewed at Aon Hewitt and found out I had a knack for human capital mergers and acquisition consulting. And I've been in consulting for 8 years since. So on that note, I want to ask, so it took me, I graduated in 2000, and I landed in consulting in 2011, or 2012. It took me 12 years to figure that out. That's a common narrative. I just took longer than everyone else on the panel here, just to be clear. But I would like to know, what is it about your educational background at Illinois Tech that really you think sets you up to be in and successful in consulting?
I'll start this one. Bit about myself. I love being really functional and working on like 20 different things. Kind of scatterbrained to that extent. But I also really love diving deep into a particular subject. So I found my engineering education kind of difficult because it required me to be really focused on a singular thing. I would say I kind of looked for experiences at IIT that kind of gave me a different perspective or different challenges. So that's why I was really so involved in a lot of these on-campus organizations. But I guess going out of school, right, I knew that I wanted to maintain that flexibility, that ability to ask questions that maybe I shouldn't necessarily be asking or dive into other topics. And when I was going through the interview process in consulting, I would say the right answers to those questions that I had is what really made me fall into that. But I would say as far as with IIT goes, the background is really just being really involved and having different experiences.
Yeah, I can add to this too. iPros and NPros are absolutely a fantastic kind of concept, and I don't know, I haven't heard of other schools doing things like that. Not that I've looked very hard, but it working with other people from different backgrounds, people that think differently than you do. So I was a business person, right? And then I had iPros where I had to work with computer science folks. I had an iPro where I had to work with materials engineers and law and like business law, like all of these different kind of like backgrounds and like opinions and perspectives on just ideas. It is very, very similar to what you would experience post-graduation in any job that you take, whether it's consulting or not. So I think that piece of IIT, it's always kind of stuck with me throughout the years, and I feel very fortunate that I was offered that opportunity to work in those types of groups, right, where you're challenged on your way of thinking by somebody that maybe has a little bit different knowledge than you do, and they see things a little bit differently. And I think that not just for consulting again, but just it prepared me for the the world, right? Like anything, any kind of job that you're going to have after you graduate that's huge.
Yeah.
I'll continue us on. What class or type of educational experience do you wish you would have taken that would have helped you in consulting? Or would you strongly recommend that they do take?
I'll say something just because for me it was again digital marketing. So not to say any negative things about the business school, because I had nothing but positive experience and great teachers. But it was mostly conceptual, and post-graduation, like even my first job in like supply chain and stuff like that, I had to use like all these different analytics tools, right? It was an e-commerce website, so I had to use digital analytics tools that I had never used in my life before. I didn't even know I didn't know what like cookies were, right? Like cookies is how like digital advertising works. Like nobody had explained cookies to me. So all of that I kind of had to learn on my own. The good news is all of the kind of core concepts that I learned, like, what is a consumer? Like, what do the consumers want? How do you find out what they want? All of that stuff was and is still very much applicable today. So like the actual, like what I learned was absolutely fantastic. What I wish I learned is like a little bit more of the hands-on with like some of the popular tools, at least in the marketing space or analytics space for me.
I would say two things really. One, for someone, I started with a computer engineering degree, but then later on found out that, hey, like I think I need to learn some business, some know-how more general than what I'm doing with computer engineering, and that's something I really recommend for everyone. Just like a minor, a class. I went and did engineering management, which is a little bit more than a minor if you're adding it to your current degree. But that's definitely something, if you're not in a business degree, go ahead and look into it. It's going to help you a lot, especially in the world of consulting. You need to understand numbers, you need to understand people, clients, things like that can help a lot. The other thing that I want to say is try to, and that's on the other spectrum, if you are not so technical and you're interested in, so I'm in technology consulting, so that's kind of where I'm speaking to. If you're interested in something like that, tech savviness is a huge thing. So a lot of times they don't ask you to be an expert in everything you hear about, but it's so good and it sells you really well when you know at least a little bit about almost everything. I'm not gonna say everything, but if you have knowledge, it's like, oh, I've heard about this, I read it somewhere, I took a class about it, whatever it is. Try to get into those as much as you can, because it'll just make you that much more interesting for employers.
My area of consultancy is more business management, and it's funny because I had a very technical background, so I wish I would have taken more psychology, because I never think you can't have enough of it. It's just people are so interesting, and in particular, if you can find a class around industrial psychology, I think that would go a long way. And that's more of the psychology of how organizations function, and that can really help you problem solve.
So I have an opinion on this, pretty strong one. What is the undergraduate class that probably helped me most at Illinois Tech was construction project administration. I learned how to be a project manager. I could tell you very clearly, I walked in the door, this is a long time ago, but I walked in the door and I actually knew how to do the critical path method that no one else knew, and I just said, yeah, don't you know this? Like, it's actually really easy. And that helped me a ton, but it got me in the door of doing project management. Project management is a functional skill that I'll talk about the difference, a functional skill that gets you into lots of different doorways of lots of other opportunities. So think of your skills that you're developing in undergraduate years as functional and technical. Functional can go across anything. This is project management. How do you build a schedule? This is business acumen. We talked a little bit earlier. When I got my MBA, I realized how much I did not learn as an engineer and how arrogant engineers are, that they think they know all of those things. And they don't. You don't. And if you think you do, eat some humble pie and take a business class. It's not fluffy. It's who you're reporting to someday, so start getting used to it. That's my opinion. I'll be quiet on that one. Everyone agree?
He's not
Wholeheartedly.
wrong.
Wholeheartedly.
I want to move us into a little different direction here. What does a typical consultant's day look like? Assuming there is a typical day, because that's what we get asked all the time. But I want someone to throw out the classic consulting answer here, so please do.
Slalom isn't the classic consulting firm, so I think this has got to go to one of you guys.
I'll give it a shot. Yes, I have to profess and say there is not so much a typical day. With consulting, it's really project-based. So you very often get assigned to a client, right? And the habits and the organization of your client a lot of time will dictate what a typical day is for you. But just to give an answer, the most typical, let's just say we work from 9 to 6 on a nice day. And if you're traveling, we travel Monday through Thursday. So I leave Chicago Monday morning, I come back Thursday, somewhat evening at a nice time. And Friday I can work from home if I want, which is really nice. That's the most typical I can think of.
I think I picked up on what you were trying to put down. The typical consulting answer is, it depends. It depends. So we can't really give one answer, but I think that's pretty typical, right? Like, especially with the traveling. Slalom is a local model, however, so we don't have a ton of travel like you would see in some of my counterparts here. So for me, my typical day is wake up and travel to my local client, which is Schaumburg for me in this instance. So I'll take a train out, do some work in the morning on the train, have some morning meetings with clients, spend the afternoon focused on my deliverables, so my head's down, more focused work, usually a lot of Excel. And then maybe I'll have some internal meetings, things that are focused on improving slalom and growing our business, and then I will go home and eat some dinner around 6. So,
Go ahead.
So what I was talking about earlier, right, when I was saying where you get to be really good at something but also do 20 different things, I would say one of my projects is a really clear example of that and why I like being in this industry. So what I was saying earlier, the example, we were doing a current, future, state, and a roadmap for a company's data analytics architecture. So that required us to travel all over the country, talking to those companies' executives and their data users to understand the issues they were having from multiple perspectives. I think clients expect that you get their problem from not just a angle, but multiple angles and from multiple perspectives of their business. So I would say that was a really interesting and fun aspect of it, is that you have to talk to a lot of people in their company to really understand the issues, and you have to, document and be very, very detail-oriented about what it is that you do find and what people do say. So I would say in this example, work for me for those 4 months were, weeks on end of client interviews, and then really strong attention to detail to documenting all of those and bringing in all of those details into what the solution would be.
Yeah, it's the whole. It depends on the project. I think is kind of like the number one thing, and it also depends on where in the project you are, right? Like if you're at the beginning of the project and you're doing requirements gathering or just trying to figure out what's going on, you're gonna have a lot of meetings. Like your days are probably gonna be either all day meetings or mostly kind of just talking to clients, et cetera, et cetera. As kind of the work, what actually needs to be done gets figured out, which happens at the beginning. So towards the middle of the project, you're actually hands-on doing things like you might have daily stand-ups with your client counterparts, saying, just kind of quick check-ins like, hey, here we are, here's the blockers, we're running into issues because of this, or we're progressing along nicely, whatever the case may be. And then towards the end of any project, this is probably the shortest kind of phase would be you're preparing to kind of showcase what you did, right? Like you're whether you're putting together a roadmap or you're actually delivering a physical product or a piece of software, whatever the case may be, you're packaging that up, making sure there's no kind of issues with it, and you know, you're getting it ready for like prime time, so to speak, right? So that's how, I mean, at least for me, that's how most of my projects have gone. So.
Yeah, very well said.
I'm going to do a two-part question here, part A followed by part B. Part A, what is your favorite part of being a consultant?
I'll go. I'm excited, guys. I like being a consultant because in every other job that I've had prior to Accenture, I was more or less pigeonholed into one type of role. So, you know, they basically, you know, whoever they is, like my managers or whatever, they basically said, you're responsible for this like really, really small slice of work. And to get out of that corner or get out of that slice, you have to, it's an uphill battle, right? So you have to kind of say like, I want to try this, and then you have to justify why, and it's a pain. With consulting at Accenture, it's the first time in all of my jobs where I actually feel like I'm doing what I actually want to do. And I'm not going to take credit for this. My friend that convinced me to come to Accenture, the way she sold it to me was, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure type of job, where if you want to try something new, there's almost nothing stopping you. As long as you meet kind of like the basic requirements, like you're not going to be able to get, for example, you know, a computer science or, you know, programming kind of role if you have zero experience in that. But within reason, as long as you meet the basic requirements, you can really do a number of different things and try a number of different things, and I think that's really cool. And I've never seen that before at any other company. So.
Why I like being a consultant, it really requires you to really take control of what it is you want to be good at and what your brand is. A thing that I'm told constantly by my, you know, advisors or people that I work with is, you know, no one's going to just give you, you know, the opportunity or the job that you want here or the responsibility that you want. You know, so it's kind of up to you to define what it is that you want, and then, you know, take the actions to make it, you know, real in that perspective. So I would say, again, just kind of being able to really take a good look and think about what you want to be good at and really exude that in what you consult in, I think is fun.
So this is probably the best thing you're going to hear from me today. So the reason I think consulting is really good, and I'm saying this for someone who is doing consulting right out of college, it's an amazing opportunity that I sometimes see as the perfect next step after graduating from a college, because it's like, it's similar to a college but more professional. We have opportunities to work on things that are extracurricular. Like you have a student organization here. I have something called initiatives, where sometimes we work on staffing, we work on planning events, we work on things. These things still exist, guys. They're out there, and if you like them, you can pursue them. But the most important thing is what Bogdan was talking about a little bit earlier, was that when you're changing projects, you're trying different roles, and you can hop a lot between those, and that's extremely valuable for a lot of you, because I can figure that there's a good number of you here who haven't yet figured out exactly what you want to do. I haven't figured out entirely yet, and in consulting, the beauty of it is that I can hop into, like, I'm speaking technology here, I can do cloud engineering, I can do machine learning, I can do coding, I can jump between a lot of things and between different platforms, and there's experts and they pay for your training. It's an amazing place to be right out of college. And the last thing I want to say about that is something that's relevant, that's going to be relevant for the rest of your life. This job is making you deal with all kinds of different people. So when you change a project, you have a new manager, you have a new leader, you have new teammates. And that's happening at least like maybe twice a year at least, right? And in that instance, now you're having to learn different people's styles and their leadership styles, and you're having to react to different kinds of people from different walks of life. That is huge, guys, because like any job you go into after, you're gonna feel like, oh my God, this guy is really difficult to deal with, or this is really something like that. I've already met someone who works like this. I know how to work the best with them. That is huge. And I think it's very hard to find it in other places than consulting.
You get paid to figure out what you want to do.
Yes.
Let that simmer for just a little while. You get paid to figure out what you want to do. Grad school, you pay to figure out what you might want to do and you don't really know. This is called return on investment. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with all the perspectives that you shared. And I think, Leo, to your point, like, you're constantly growing when you're in that environment. It's really fast-paced. And the other aspect that I appreciate about consulting is the exposure that I have to senior leadership. So when I'm working for a client, you know, the people who are our buyers are at higher levels of the company. And to be 25 right out of school working with a COO or, you know, head of IT operations, that's pretty high pressure, but I've really appreciated that because you learn and absorb so much. And the experience, I mean, 5 years of consulting experience feels like 10, 15 years of industry experience to me, you know?
Yeah, the amount that I would say pretty clearly, 1 year of, and we would talk about this when I was in my MBA program, 1 year of consulting is like 2 or 3 years in an industry. Because the amount of interactions that you get, that you have, is so much more. So it's like cheating at life a little bit. You get to like have the benefit of so much more experience in such a more condensed time frame. That being said, part 2 of the question, what's the part that you like least about consulting? Be honest. No spinning answers of like, I really don't like it, but I kind of like it.
I hate my commute. It's a pretty simple answer.
I'll go ahead. So I think one challenge that's hard to deal with is a lot of times we jump into a project where like it's a fire drill is what we call. We're having to react to a problem that the client has already recognized. A lot of times that we're working with really short deadlines. It's not like we had time to plan and, you know, see things through and then just step A, B, and C. No, it's like A, B, and C through Z all happening on day one, and it gets really crazy. And sometimes we end up working late hours and things like that. That's not every project. If you're navigating your career and you control your career within consulting, for the most part, you can avoid those. But I have wanted to try them, and that's something that I found really challenging, but once it's done, it's rewarding. So I'm going to flip it and say it is my least favorite thing, but there's always something good to get out of it.
I will say that not every project is going to be like roses or whatever the expression is. Sometimes there's a lot of ambiguity, and it's kind of like uncomfortable at the beginning where like no one really knows. You know, until you figure out what the client actually wants and what you are responsible for, there's a lot of kind of like it's spinning your wheels in the mud. So you try different things, you know, maybe the client's like, that's not what I want, but they don't know what they want, right? So then they can't tell you, they can't articulate like, this is what we're trying to do. So you try different things until something finally sticks. So that period of kind of like ambiguity before you align or you kind of figure out what the client wants and what you can deliver against what the client wants sometimes is kind of frustrating. But to Leo's point, that's it's not every project. It's for me, it's rare.
Yeah, to his point on, you know, sometimes there's projects where you don't necessarily like. There is a very big, you know, there's this, you got to take one for the team sometimes is commonly referred to or something like that in terms of projects. So I would say in those cases, sometimes, you know, you've got to be political with how you navigate within your own firm and also how you navigate in your client site. You've got to be strategic with, you know, the questions that you ask, what your intention is in trying to navigate a certain situation. So I would say that sometimes consulting environments, both internally and at client sites, can be fairly political places where you've got to, you know, tiptoe about what your next step is.
So we're going to move towards practical, but we've got about 10 more minutes before we go to Q&A, maybe 15 minutes. How how should students begin to prepare for a career in consulting or professional services? What would you tell them they should start doing?
I'll start with this one. I kind of talked about it earlier, but I think as consultants, you're kind of expected to, connect the dots, so to say, really understand a problem from different perspectives and understand the problem really well. Something that I like doing, that I get a lot of kick out, is talking to your friends about the issues they have, the industries they work in, what's prevalent in their industries. I think it's important to apply what your really expertise is on the entire industry, or really understand what's happening within industry. I think developing an industry expertise is somewhat important as well. So I would say, to that aspect, explore industries that you really want to work in and want to consult in, because there is, your vertical, what you really can be good at technically, and then there's, more of the industry that you exist in, if you'd like it to be that way.
Yeah, I would say that, we've kind of mentioned this, we've all spoken to it already, but round out your skill set. So if you're very technical, try to complement that with something that's more people or business focused. If you're business, if you're humanities, psychology, anything like that, see what you can add to your plate that might be a little bit more technical, or at least get a baseline understanding of it, because if you can speak that language, you're good to go.
I would say a couple of things. So I'm going to tell a little brief story. One of the most interesting and challenging classes I had at Illinois Tech, I was an architectural engineering major, but it was nothing to do with that. It was actually my policy analysis class. And Scott Peters is the professor. And he literally walked into a class one day and he gave us each like this big, thick 3-inch binder of paper. And it was data on the city of Detroit. And he started the class, walked in and he said, Detroit has a problem in the 1970s. Find it. And then he walked out. And that experience is a lot of what consulting is like. You don't have, you can apply frameworks, you can apply some of those things, but you have to find out what the problem is, and it's not as easy as it sounds. And you can have a functional or technical expertise, and that helps you, but that is often one of the areas that happens there. I think the other thing I would say is those iPros and NPros are really, really good experiments, because if you like those, that is probably the closest academic experience you can find to consulting, is leading one of those.
So I would like to point out that I would say there's a lot out there, but there's these 3 things that I think if you walk into an interview and you can articulate that you have to a certain level, it will take you a long way. One, I think, is your flexibility to change. I want to say change management, but you're not necessarily managing others. You're managing yourself, hopping between projects and people and teams. That's one. 2 is your willingness to learn. They hire a lot of people from different degrees and backgrounds and whatnot, but what they expect the most is, are you willing to learn this thing, either at the project right when you start, or can you prepare ahead of time, and then now we can start asking you to work with this new knowledge that you have. So change and willingness to learn, and I think the most important one is your ability to work with people and communicate and all these things, which I'm sure has been emphasized to you so many times. So if you still have the time in Illinois Tech, I think one of the best ways to do that is to get involved outside of your classroom. If you're not, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to get involved, get yourself in front of people, get yourself in front of challenges, new people, new challenges, and it will help you strike some of those and say at least you have the experience, and say you're someone who's experienced these 3 things before. And if you can articulate that in your interview, it will help a lot.
We're getting a little more practical. So, giving them opportunities to focus and grow. Let's say they decide to want to interview. How do you prepare for a consulting interview? And if a case interview is part of that, how do you prepare for a case interview?
So I'll speak to Slalom's interview process specifically, because I'm not sure what it's like for other companies, but for slalom, I think the most important piece of advice that I have is to really focus on what your story is, what you want, why you're there, why you're interested in consulting, and have that articulated and understood in your mind. Because if you can communicate that, it will come across authentically, and you want to be who you are. That's one of our core values at Slalom, is authenticity. So if you're faking it, if you're pretending to be something that you aren't, that's going to read, and it's not going to be a good match. So you want to be, at least with Slalom, presenting yourself as you are, and ideally you want to do this everywhere because it will help you find the right match for your employer. For me, understanding why I wanted to be in consulting was a huge part of it because I was coming from a different area. So be yourself. It's cliche, but it's true. In terms of the case interview, I think my simple advice is to be chill about it. Don't panic. I spent a lot of time doing like MBA case studies and like flipping through all these papers thinking like, oh gosh, I have a chemical engineering degree. What do I know about business? How am I going to do a case study? But I think what you need to remember is that it's about your thinking and approach to problem solving. So definitely practice some case studies, and there are tons of resources available online for that, but don't psych yourself out about it, and slow down. Take a minute. If you're presented with a problem and a client comes to you and says, our revenue is decreasing, can you help us find out why? What kind of questions would you ask to get to the core of the problem? If you can think through that, you'll be in a good place for a case interview.
Quick question here before we move forward, but how many people in the crowd are like graduate students with experience, and like how many are undergrad? So I guess first we'll go with how many are undergrad? Cool. And how many graduate school with experience? Or just graduate school? Okay, that's good to know. I would say that, coming straight out of undergrad and then interviewing with experience, two very different experiences there. I would say coming in fresh out of school, I definitely had to give a good case for what I wanted to learn, why it is that why I liked the company. Since I've worked at Slalom and gained some experience and then switched out to other firms, I would say that the experience is much more about what did you do at those firms, like what did you learn, what was your role in the project, how did you work with other people. A really huge emphasis also in just how I worked with other people, how I resolved issues with others. I have done interviews that are very, very structured case, and I won't go through that right now about what I think you need for those, but if you do find yourself where you need to do a very structured case, happy to talk about that afterwards.
So one quick thing about case interviews, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this, but this is something I've observed, is that the result of the case, you're going to give a result, an answer eventually, is important, but is not the most important thing. I think what they're looking for is how you arrive at the answer. So I'll go out and say this now, my result was not the best I could give, but they were able to appreciate my thought process. I gave him the answer he was not looking for, but he was like, okay, why did you get there? And I was able to explain a pretty thorough thought process of how I got there, and he appreciated that, right? So I think that applies to almost all the cases out there. Just your journey, your thought process, and your problem solving to get to your answer is, in my opinion, more important to them than the final answer that you give, if that makes sense.
And just to kind of reinforce Leo's prior point, at least all of the case studies that I didn't have to take a case study, but I've seen examples. Most of them are business oriented. So to your point earlier, if you have the opportunity to take some business classes to kind of understand like how is the business structured, what are their priorities, like all of those things are going to be important. There is math, and there are sometimes more technical case studies, sometimes there's less technical case studies, but just understanding like at a very high level how a business functions, I think is going to be extremely helpful. And you might not need to take a whole class on it, but at the very least do some reading, read some textbooks, or just like informational kind of material on it. That's one. And then two more things. The second one is just relax. Like I know it's like super stressful. Like if you ever have those types of interviews, it's very stressful. Like it can be like nerve wracking, but just slow down, just relax, just think through it. It's not a race. I mean, there is a time limit, but you're not rushing to give an answer. You're just, take your time to think through it before you give an answer. And yeah, I mean, it's the third thing is it's usually easier than you think. The answer is usually much easier than you think, so it's not as complicated as the question or the kind of the background information comes off as. So.
Yeah, I'll kind of give the best framework that you can probably study, or at least the first go-to, is McKinsey's MECE, M-E-C-E, mutually exclusive, comprehensively exhaustive. Mutually exclusive, comprehensively exhaustive. So what does that mean? Okay, terms aside, like that's allowing you to create some sort of tree on how this works. So I'm going to give a very example. Company X wants to increase profit. How should they do so? Well, what is profit? Profit is revenue minus expenses. So you could either increase revenue or decrease expenses. So what does that mean? Well, okay, how would you go about decreasing expenses? How would you go about increasing revenue? So this is the type of framework and thinking that will help you in a case interview. That being said, your goal is to lead your interviewer through a logical explanation as to why you came to the decisions that you did. They are looking for your intellectual horsepower and ability to communicate said horsepower to another human. That's what a case interview is about. So we are at that time here. We have 2 more minutes before we move to questions. So I want you to give a very short sentence to the following question. What do you need to have to be successful in consulting?
A growth mindset.
I would say flexibility, a flexible mindset.
This was something I heard from one of my professors, but a bit of swagger.
I would say savviness and general know-how will take you a long way.
And I'd say curiosity and tenacity. Okay. I would love to open up to the questions to the panel here. This is a great opportunity. I will do my best impression here, but who has questions, and I'll bring the mic to you. Okay.
Too late.
Hi, my name's Heather. I'm a chemical engineer, just like 2 of you. I recognize both of you and Leo. I don't know who you are, but that's okay. So my first question is, what do you do when you're stressed at work?
When you're stressed at work.
Stressed at work.
I work out, but that's just me.
Yeah.
So
That actually happened to me Wednesday, but I was we just had finished the meeting, and the results of the meeting weren't too happy, and as a result, after the meeting I wasn't feeling too well. We still had work to do. It was towards the end of the day. It was past normal working hours, let's just say that, but frankly I just didn't feel like I can operate well, and I was running on very few brain cells. So I just went to my manager. I was like, hey, I need a change of space, and I need a breather. I just need some time, and I'll get back on it. And that's what I did, and it helped a lot, because I don't think if I had continued to push on at that time, it would have worked.
Yeah, I would say that to his point, it could be fairly grueling. People have very, very high expectations, especially the client side, on what it is that you can do and what you know. So to that certain extent, you start to feel down on yourself for those days where you're just like, not cut out for this. Really just give yourself some self-compassion, tell yourself about all the positive things that you can do and you have done, and just kind of don't get lost in that cycle there.
Yeah, I mean, I do yoga, but I think it's important to take a look at your mindset and understand what parts of the way that you're approaching your work are contributing to why you feel stressed. So, of course, there's like gonna be times where the project is really intense and you can't really do anything about that. You might have to put some extra time in. But I think for me, and I can speak personally to my experience in my early career, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is I'm a perfectionist and I need to address that, right? So I can make myself wig out about being a perfectionist and having everything be perfect. But one of the best pieces of advice I ever received on that front was when something's 90% and you want to try to take it to 100%, how much effort and time and energy are you spending on that extra 10%? And is it really worth it? Is 90% okay? And if you're someone who struggles with perfectionism and you get really stressed out as a result of that, that could be a good thing to keep in mind.
And the only other thing that I would add is you have to be honest with, one, yourself, right? Like, what are your limits? Be cognizant of when you are mentally burning out and when you maybe are going a little bit stir crazy. But also be honest with your team, specifically the people that you maybe report up to, because they're going to be on your side 10 out of 10 times. I've never had like a supervisor, manager, whatever, say no, like you're feeling crappy. No, you still have to work, right? So they're going to say, look, you know, what can we do? Like, do you need some, you know, do you need a break? Like, go take a break. Do you need, and you know, most of the time, I'm not going to say all the time, most of the time, it's not heart surgery, right? Like, you're not like saving lives. So it's like,
True.
if the client is making ridiculous demands and everybody, like, you talk to your manager and like you kind of reach an agreement and they're on your side, like, you know, you can push back on that a little bit and say, look, I know you want this ridiculous thing by tomorrow, but that's just not realistic, right? So I think honesty with yourself and your team is huge.
One quick exercise that I also like to do really quickly is I try to sit down when I have the time and I list down all the things that are stressing me out, because a lot of times when you're stressed, it's not just one thing. And start thinking, what of these things can I start tackling? What can I get rid of to start feeling better? And that usually helps a lot. Just think about what it is and how you can approach it and start hitting them one by one.
Thank you. Question 2 here.
Hello everyone, my name is Irshad. I graduated May 2017 from business school here, and right now I'm working as an IT analyst downtown Chicago. My question is about how consultants go about resolving their issues when they are at the client side. If they run into any issue, who is there to help them with that? And is there a team that comes with you from your own company or on the client side?
It depends. I can go ahead. There's different answers to that, and that depends on the structure of the company you're going into. A lot of times your response is available in your team. When we deploy a team into a client, we try to cover our bases. We have the technical person, we have the project manager, we have what we call a partner, which is basically the leader of the project. That person is responsible with dealing the most with the client leadership. So we have a structure that is deployed at the same time. That is your immediate support structure. Like you said, though, sometimes these people don't exactly know how to tackle a problem. There are already systems in place within the company that prepare you for that. So we have a term called coaches, which are architects, people who are very experienced in what they do. We just call them up. They perhaps work part-time with us. Sometimes they fly in. Sometimes it's just a phone call thing, right? And these guys just give us the knowledge that we need, and then we could just pursue with it. And if they need to be more involved, they will be. They're available.
I'd say in figuring out some problems, there's a time to include your client in fixing that, and there's a time to not. So that's something to really think about sometimes, because you don't really want to bring your client into really menial issues or that sort of thing. But to his point as well, yeah, I know EY, they like to, when staffing projects, keep some hours available for, you know, our partners or other experts, so that when the team's on the ground and they really run into a problem that maybe they don't necessarily know the answer to or they need another perspective from, we can call on some of those people, or they can come in and for point solutions, that sort of thing. Hope that helped.
The only other thing I would add to that is it depends on it very much depends on the nature and kind of the scope of the problem. To Oscar's point, like some things are very minor. You can probably figure it out given enough time. There's no sense in involving your client because you don't want to scare them, right? You don't want to cause them to panic or anything like that, because then it just kind of snowballs into a whole thing, kind of making a mountain out of a molehill. But when major things break, at least at Accenture, and it sounds like every consultancy has the same model, but you have a support system in place to reach out to that can answer. I mean, even if it takes a few kind of days, right, to find that person, like there's somebody within your network that will know what that problem is, what's causing it, and how to fix it. So there's always somebody that you can reach out and lean on for help. You're not alone.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Lucas Chan. I'm a PhD student in organizational psychology. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's the industrial organizational psychology. And as someone mentioned iPro, I'm a adjunct faculty member at iPro and also provide leadership consulting for students' development of soft skills. So I'm always interested in consulting, but I've never dabbled into any of the consulting companies. So my question for you is, when the doctors are ill, who heal themselves, or in other words, what are some typical issues that you see that happen or are experienced by many consulting companies from within?
Just to clarify, the internal problems of consulting companies. Oh, this is interesting. Air the dirty laundry, people.
Okay, well, with Slalom, we're a bit of a different operating model than some of the large common consulting companies you'd hear of, like Accenture or Deloitte. So we're much smaller, still pretty big, I think. It's like 10,000 or so people. And I think right now what we have is growing pains because we're growing so rapidly. But our culture is so foundational to how the business operates and what is important and how we do work that I think what I've seen is that the struggle is to grow rapidly, maintain that culture, and scale up our policies, procedures, and operating models so that everyone's satisfied. So, for instance, one of the things that we're going through right now is how do you give people a career framework and a pathway to grow that works for them? And how do you have multiple options to do that? Because our growth patterns are completely different. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but with your companies, it's more like very structured. I think you mentioned it. It's a clear pathway. We don't really have that at Slalom. And there's a reason behind that. Part of it is because we want a choose your own adventure style where, it's flat and you can be a consultant at the end of your career or at the beginning. And that means a lot of things. But a lot of people aren't satisfied with that at the same time. So we're trying to figure out how to fix that so people can move in their career and feel satisfied with that journey.
I'll give two things. One of them, and I think a lot of consulting firms deal with this, is there's high turnover in consulting. So you've got to figure out a way to really deliver consistent quality work with a really revolving door of people. So I think that's kind of an interesting aspect of consulting. The second one I'll say is really making the most out of every project or every opportunity that you learn from. I've seen like a big push in consulting to really productize, the service offerings that they do have, which really just shows your clients that you've learned from your previous experiences, and now here's what you have that you can package and sell to them. It will work for the most part in their organization. So I would say, learning a lot and really making the most out of every experience from a consulting firm perspective.
So I'm an analyst. I'm in my second year, so most of what I'm saying is speculation, but I want to say it anyway because I think it might be of interest to you when it comes to consulting and IO psychology, of course. I think one of the challenges that exist is through our framework, we're staffed on projects, right? So we change projects. But what happens in between is that there's time where you have a lot of employees that are not on projects, right? So you're not exactly utilizing the most out of them, right? So the challenge becomes is, what do you exactly do? What structures do you have in place for these employees to benefit themselves, benefit the company, and like how do you control that, right? Because a lot of it is free time, and you can only encourage, at the moment, to my understanding, for them to learn things and to try and benefit the company internally and things like that. And that ties a lot with performance as well. So a huge piece of our performance evaluation comes from how many hours do we spend with an actual client. And that's always a question that is out there. And I've heard from other companies. I have a friend that works at Bain, where their system is they're not, and I'm quoting him specifically, I don't know, I didn't research it, but apparently their system is that they don't exactly ask you how many hours you've worked with a client. The expectation is that when you're offered something, you work it, and when you don't have something to work, that's fine. With Deloitte, however, you are expected to own your career, and when you're not on a project, you need to be constantly pursuing opportunities to get yourself on one, and your performance is tied to that. There's a metric called utilization. How many of your working hours of the year were at a client site?
Yeah, and one more thing, actually two more things to build on top of that is, one is performance is tied to utilization or chargeability. It's a number of different kind of things. And sometimes you work with people that you may not like. And those people may or may not be your superior on that particular project. And at the end of the project, you have to ask them for feedback, right? So if you don't like somebody, it's a struggle to be nice to them, for lack of better words, right? So it's like just to be, not get into, debates or anything like that might kind of challenge their authority or whatever. Like you want them to have a good opinion of you, and you want to do good work, obviously. But sometimes you just don't jive, right? You butt heads, and navigating that, knowing that they're kind of responsible for giving you feedback on your performance is challenging. Has only ever happened to me once so far at Accenture, so it's fine. Not that often. The other thing is this thing with in between projects, right? So, the further up you go in your career, right? You start as an analyst, your chargeability goal is like 90-something%, like 90% of your time or 100%, right? Like you want to be chargeable on a project. As you progress, that gets a little bit lower. You're expected to do more business development type work, et cetera. But there's that pressure on you in between projects to go out, network, meet people, and kind of make yourself available to hiring managers within, for projects, and get yourself staffed. Now, it's not solely your responsibility. We have entire teams of folks that are kind of looking out for you, especially like at the beginning, like as an analyst, they'll look out for you and say, here's a project we think you might be interested in. Do you want to take it, et cetera? But ultimately, the more you network, the better off you'll be, because you'll be known to people that staff projects. And that can be very challenging for some people. Not everybody's really good at it. I'm not very good at it. So it's definitely a struggle for me. So that's kind of one of the pain points, I guess you would call it. But certainly nothing that can't be overcome.
So I'm a senior practice leader, and what I'll say is that so if I'm going to talk to an organizational psychologist, it's all about how well do we align incentives. Is the alignment of the incentive of the business aligned with the incentives of the employee? Talk about the time between projects, which is affectionately called the bench. Some people call it a beach. We at Solemn, I always say it's a bench because you need to get ready to pick up the bat and get at the plate as soon as possible. I also was our chief of staff and I was involved of all staffing decisions for approximately 210 employees during a season, and that was really challenging because it's all about how well do you align incentives. There is a delicate balance in consulting where, as a consultant, you have the incentives that are provided for you to work and keep your utilization, chargeability, whatever metric you use to provide how many hours you're billing a client. At the same time, you want to grow your career. And when you become really good at one thing, you might get bored at that thing. And you don't want to do that thing anymore. But you're really good at it. So the question is, how do you do that? And that is where the relationship you have with your people manager is absolutely critical. And your ability to have the conversation of, here's where I want to go in my career. That being said, you need to develop the skills to do what you want to do, which is not as easy as it sounds. So that's from the consultant's perspective. From the business perspective, your ability of how utilized and how chargeable is our practice. Can we increase our rates? But usually for higher rate work, those are shorter engagements, which means we cannot do as many of those at the same time. So we have to get more of those stacked, which is more challenging. Those longer projects usually meet our lower rate for a business, but it frees up more ability to focus on other work. And then there's all about capabilities. What can we do and how well do we go? Do we need to bring other people that can do that, or can we learn to do that ourselves? So the very long story of it, that's a very long way of saying it's all about how well do we align incentives. As an organizational psychologist, I'm sure that's probably something you could think about pretty clearly. It also comes down to how good are your people managers at uncovering what people want, what they really, really want. To quote the great philosopher, Posh Spice. Any other questions? We have time for, nope, it's 5:58. We are getting time. One final question that can be answered very quickly by humans. Yes, you're going to yell this time.
It's not really quick, but what do you do to not get burnt out? Like you go to work every single day, how do you stay motivated? How are you just not dead?
Take vacations, like actually take vacations, and you get a lot of. I think most consultancies have a pretty generous PTO policy. I would say, use your vacation days.
Surround yourself with people you like. You might not be available right away, but try to find that place. Whether it's in the same company or a different one, I think you should always pursue that.
I think something funny that was told to me at one point is, this is a thankless job, like a joke. But I guess what I'm getting at is you got to set your boundaries, you know? There's always more to do, and people will go to you to do that if you constantly make yourself available. So setting your boundaries on what you can and can't do there.
Boundaries are really important. Stop looking at your email at a certain time every night, you know, or on the weekends. You got to put a cap on it, and if you don't, that's a recipe for burnout for sure.
Yeah. Being a control freak may help you in your undergraduate career get a good GPA. It will kill you in consulting. And the quicker you learn how to address that, the better you'll be able to respond. So take vacations and don't be a control freak.
Learn to say no, too.
Yeah.
That's a big
Yes.
one. You can say no.
Want to say thank you to everyone. Great panelists, you were awesome. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to the panelists. I'll give it back to BJ.
Thank you so much, panel. There's still an opportunity to talk with these panelists now. We have a networking time over in Tel Labs. We've got food over there. Please eat our food. We've got plenty of it for you. All of these individuals want to have a chance to talk with you. We also have several other consulting professionals, alumni here on the first row that are also excited to talk to you. So please take advantage of this opportunity. As Sarah mentioned earlier, your consulting career starts with networking, right? So this is a really great time to practice. As is probably abundantly clear, this has been recorded. It was live streamed and recorded with the camera down here in front. So in probably the next week or so, this will be available on the IIT Alumni Association YouTube page as a part of our Hawk Talk series. So if there's something that you want to go back and look at, like try and remember what Andy said about the mutually exclusive thing, you know, you can go back and check it out. If you have friends that you think might be interested in the consulting industry and you thought this was a really great experience, please push them to check out the video. And like many of the videos that we have on there, they've had hundreds and hundreds of views. I really think that this material is going to get viewed over and over again. It's going to be a really great resource for students and alumni for years to come. All right, with that, let's get started with the networking. All right, thank you.